Daisy's words cut through the warm evening air sharper than any blade. Too bad your baby looks nothing like your husband. The room, once filled with clinking silverware and soft laughter, froze as if someone had blown out all the candles at once. I sat there with my smile trembling, trying to hold on, waiting, hoping for my husband to step in, to say something, to protect me. But instead, Jared laughed. That weak, nervous laugh he always used when he wanted to stay in his family's good graces. And then he twisted the knife further. Maybe Olivia has a secret. It was as if the ground beneath me cracked open. My own husband, the father of my child, had chosen to throw me to the wolves rather than defend me. The betrayal wasn't in the joke itself, it was in his silence when I needed him most, in the cheap laugh he bought at the expense of my dignity. Around the table his family erupted in cruel delight. Patricia, his mother, who insisted I call her mom, hid her giggle behind a napkin. Robert, his stern father, chuckled into his whiskey. Even Rebecca, the cousin I thought might be on my side, covered her mouth as her eyes sparkled with amusement. And Daisy, my sister-in-law, wore her smirk like a crown. But it was Jared's reaction, the man I vowed to share my life with, that broke something inside me that night. Our 10-month-old son George was upstairs sleeping peacefully in his crib, his soft breaths a world away from this ugliness. He had no idea that his very existence had just been made into a punchline. What made me sick wasn't just the laughter echoing in my ears, it was the memory of the whispers that had come before. The little comments Jared thought I hadn't heard. His nose looks too sharp for our family. Are you sure about the timing? His eyes studying George like he was inspecting evidence, not gazing at his son. The way he pulled back during bath time, too careful, too distant, as if holding someone else's child. I had excused it all for months. Told myself it was new father nerves. Pretended it was temporary. But deep down I knew. The doubt wasn't new, it had been festering since the hospital. I felt every eye at the table on me, waiting for me to break. They wanted a scene, tears, anger, maybe even me storming out. But something hardened in me instead. A calm, icy clarity. I wasn't going to give them the performance they wanted. I wasn't going to beg for their approval or argue for my son's legitimacy. I was going to end this game once and for all. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood, the sound sharp in the silence. Without a word I walked out, my heels clicking deliberately against the floor. Behind me, I heard whispers, speculation, confusion. They thought I was going to cry in the bathroom, maybe call my sister. They had no idea that I was walking toward the truth I had been keeping hidden for months. In my jewelry box beneath the pearls Jared had given me for our anniversary lay a plain white envelope. It had been there since July. I had hidden it like a weapon, waiting for the right moment to strike. Inside was 3 months of secrets, 3 months of pain turned into power. That night, with Daisy's cruel smirk still burned into my vision, and Jared's betrayal ringing in my ears, I knew the moment had come. I remembered the day I collected the samples, George's golden hair carefully sealed in a tissue, Jared's toothbrush bristles scraped at dawn when the house was quiet. I remembered the 43-minute drive to Riverside Genetics, my hands trembling as I handed over my life to a stranger in a lab coat. The weeks of waiting, my heart pounding each time I checked the mailbox. And then the envelope arriving like any other piece of mail, carrying inside it the proof I already knew in my soul. Probability of paternity 99.99%. I cried on the kitchen floor that day. Relief, rage, vindication, grief. Because even though the paper proved George was Jared's son, it also proved something else, that my marriage was broken. That I had been forced to prove something no wife, no mother should ever have to prove. That the man I had trusted most in this world had poisoned our love with suspicion. And now here I was, holding that same envelope in my hand, walking back toward the dining room. Toward the laughter that had mocked me. Toward the family that had questioned my worth from the very beginning. Each step felt deliberate, final, like a drumbeat announcing the end of something. I stopped in the doorway. Every head turned. Every conversation died. My voice was steady, carrying across the room with crystal clarity. Since we're sharing secrets tonight, Open this. I placed the envelope in front of Jared. His confident smirk faltered. His hands fumbled. His eyes darted from the envelope to my face. He knew. Somehow he knew his world was about to shatter. Jared's fingers trembled as he picked up the envelope, the laughter around the table dissolving into an uneasy hush. For the first time that evening, no one smirked. No one dared whisper. Every eye watched him the same way spectators watch a magician's trick, knowing something impossible is about to unfold but not sure how. He tried to play it off at first, chuckling nervously, shaking his head as though I had brought him a silly love note or some sentimental relic. But his eyes betrayed him. I knew those eyes. I had memorized them through years of marriage, in moments of love, in moments of lies. And now they darted frantic like a cornered animal. Open it, I said quietly. My voice wasn't raised, but it cut sharper than any scream could have. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Robert cleared his throat. Even Daisy, the queen of cruel jabs, looked uncertain for the first time that night. Jared's hands tore at the paper clumsily, like he hoped the act of ripping it open might destroy the truth inside. But the paper slipped free, smooth and undeniable. His eyes scanned the document, and with every line his face drained of color. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. I watched the bravado dissolve, watched the mask he wore for years collapse into something raw and terrified. Finally he looked up at me, his lips parting as though to speak, but there was nothing left to say. You wanted the truth, I whispered, my throat tight. Now you have it. The silence was deafening. I could hear the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the clink of Rebecca's fork slipping from her hand. They all leaned forward as though hungry for a fight, for tears, for a scene that would give them more to laugh about later. But instead, I gave them none of that. I gave them only truth. My son, I said, my voice growing stronger, is his father's child. Every doubt you planted, every cruel word, every whisper behind my back ended here tonight. Daisy's smirk returned for just a flicker, but it died the second she caught Jared's expression. He looked as if the earth had opened beneath him, as though the entire structure of his lies had finally collapsed. Patricia reached for him, but he jerked away, ashamed even of her comfort. Robert tried to regain control, muttering something about family business, but his voice was hollow. None of them could cover what had just been exposed, and me. For the first time in months, I breathed freely. Not because I wanted to save my marriage, no, that was already broken beyond repair, but because I had taken back something they had stolen from me, my dignity, my voice. I looked at Jared one last time, my heart heavy with everything I had once felt for him. The love, the hope, the belief that he would protect me, that he would stand beside me. But all of that had died long before tonight. Tonight was simply the funeral. You mocked me, you doubted me, you left me alone in the moment I needed you most. I said, my voice trembling but clear, and for that, Jared, there is no forgiveness. The weight of those words seemed to hang in the air, pressing down on everyone in the room. George's cry echoed faintly from upstairs, as though punctuating the moment, reminding them all of what truly mattered. I straightened my shoulders, turned, and walked away from the table. Behind me, I heard the sound of Jared's chair scrape against the floor, a desperate shuffle, his voice calling my name. But I didn't stop. His words meant nothing now, they were too late. As I climbed the stairs to my son's room, I felt my body trembling, not from fear, but from release. I pushed open the nursery door, and found George stirring, his tiny fists rubbing at his eyes. When I lifted him into my arms, his warmth, his scent, his very existence anchored me. Here was the only truth I ever needed. Here was the proof of love, pure and uncorrupted. I pressed a kiss to his soft hair and whispered, "We're going to be okay, I promise." Downstairs I could still hear the muffled chaos, raised voices, arguments, panic. But none of it mattered anymore. I had chosen my side. I had chosen my son. And in that choice, I had finally chosen myself. When I finally laid George back into his crib, his little chest rising and falling in the rhythm of untroubled dreams, I lingered beside him longer than usual. His innocence felt like a shield against the storm raging downstairs. I wanted so badly to stay in that quiet nursery forever, to never return to the ugliness waiting beneath. But a part of me knew this wasn't over. Not yet. I walked down the stairs slowly, each step heavy like descending into a battlefield. The voices grew clearer with every step. Patricia scolding Jared, Robert demanding control, Daisy whispering poison disguised as concern. But when I appeared in the doorway, they all fell silent again. Jared stood near the table, his face pale and drawn. He looked at me the way a drowning man looks at the shore, desperate, grasping but too far gone to ever reach it. "Olivia," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, it was a joke. I didn't mean." I held up a hand. "Don't insult me with excuses." He froze, his words drying up in his throat. For the first time I saw fear in his eyes, not fear of me, but fear of himself, of what he had become. "Do you know what it felt like?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. "To sit there while your family laughed at me while you joined them. Do you know what it feels like to have the man you trust most in the world treat you like a stranger's accusation?" His lips parted, but he had no answer. He had lived comfortably in his doubt for months. He had thought it was his right to question, to ridicule, to suspect. And now the evidence in that envelope had stripped him bare. Patricia shifted uneasily, folding her napkin into tighter and tighter creases. "We didn't mean any harm," she murmured. "Families joke, you're too sensitive." "Ooh." I turned to her, my patience snapping. "Sensitive? You all sat here and laughed at a child who can't defend himself. You laughed at me when I carried him for 9 months, when I bled to bring him into this world. You wanted to believe I wasn't enough, that I didn't belong. And Jared." I looked at him again, my chest burning. "You were supposed to be my partner, my safe place. Instead you handed me to the wolves." Robert's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Daisy smirked faintly, though her eyes flicked nervously toward Jared. She thrived on chaos, but even she knew the ground was shifting beneath her. Jared stepped closer, desperation seeping into his voice. "Olivia, please. I was wrong. I doubted, I admit it. But I can fix this. We can fix this." I shook my head slowly. "You can't fix trust once it's broken. You can tape it together, you can pretend it's whole, but the cracks never disappear. Every time I look at you, I'll hear your laughter at my expense. Every time you hold George, I'll remember how you questioned his place in your life." The silence that followed was heavier than shouting could ever be. And then Rebecca, the cousin, who had been quiet all evening, finally spoke. Her voice trembled, but her words cut deeper than mine. "She's right. Jared, you've been talking about this for months. About how George might not be yours. You said it to me. You said it to Daisy. Don't stand here and act like this is just a joke gone too far." Gasps rippled across the room. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Robert's eyes narrowed. Daisy turned crimson, caught in the betrayal of her own alliance. Jared's face twisted with rage and shame. "Rebecca, shut your mouth." But it was too late. The truth had been dragged into the open, raw and undeniable. I stared at Jared, my breath catching in my throat. "You poisoned everyone against me," I whispered. "Even when you had proof, you kept feeding them doubt. You let them look at me like I was nothing. You let them look at George like he didn't belong." His shoulders slumped, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. But sympathy had no place in me anymore. I was hollow where love used to live. "I don't know what the future holds," I said, my voice trembling. "But I know this. George and I will never sit at this table like this again, not as long as the memory of tonight exists." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving behind the stunned silence of a family that had built its unity on cruelty. The night air hit my face, cool and sharp, as if cleansing me. I stood there for a moment under the stars, feeling the tremors of everything I had just unleashed. Inside, the shouting began. Patricia scolding Rebecca, Robert barking orders, Jared begging for calm. But none of it touched me anymore. I had already left even before my feet crossed the threshold. I didn't sleep that night. Even after the house went quiet, after George's steady breathing filled the nursery, I sat awake in the armchair by the window, staring into the darkness. My chest ached, not with fear anymore, but with the sharp, hollow pain of realization. I had married a man who chose the comfort of his family's approval over the sanctity of mine. I had built a home with someone who doubted the very blood we shared in our son. When the first rays of dawn seeped through the curtains, I rose, careful not to wake George. I packed a small bag with what we needed most: diapers, clothes, the soft blanket he couldn't sleep without. Then I slipped into our bedroom. Jared lay sprawled across the bed, the same man I had once looked at with endless love. His mouth hung slightly open, his hair mussed from restless sleep. For a fleeting second, I almost remembered what it felt like to want to protect him, to ease his worries. But then, I remembered the laughter, the way he had looked at me with mockery instead of love. And that memory hardened me again. I pulled open the dresser and took out the second envelope, the one he didn't know existed. Months ago, when the doubts first started, I had begun documenting everything. The late-night texts to Daisy mocking my sensitivity, the bank transfers to cover debts he never told me about, even the drunken voicemail he left on Robert's phone slurring accusations that George was not his. I hadn't meant to collect ammunition. I just wanted the truth, wanted something to hold on to when my own sanity felt fragile. But now, in the pale light of morning, that file of betrayal became my weapon. When Jared finally stirred and blinked at me standing there, bag in hand, he looked confused. "Olivia. Where are you going?" I turned to face him, my voice steady. "Away from here, away from you." He shot up in bed, panic flaring in his eyes. "No, you can't just take him and leave. He's my son." The irony of that word burned through me. "Only when it suits you, Jared. Only when you're not laughing at him." He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, his voice rising. "I was drunk. I was stupid. It was one night, Olivia. One night." I stepped closer, pressing the second envelope into his chest. His hands clutched at it automatically. Confusion etched into his features. "It wasn't just one night," I said quietly. "It was every night you let doubt rot this family. Every whisper, every cruel word, every betrayal you tried to bury." His fingers fumbled with the seal, and when he saw what was inside, copies of texts, receipts, voicemails, his face collapsed into horror. "You kept all this?" "Yes," I said, "because I knew this moment would come. Because some part of me always knew you'd choose them over me. And now you can sit here surrounded by the wreckage you created and remember that I warned you." Tears pricked his eyes, but I felt nothing but clarity. I had already mourned the loss of us long before this moment. I turned toward the door. "George and I will be safe. We will be loved. You'll have to answer for what you've done to your family, to yourself. But you'll never have the power to hurt us again." He stumbled after me, reaching out, but I pulled away. His hands that once felt like home now felt like shackles I had finally broken free from. As I carried George to the car, the morning sun bathed us in light, golden and sharp like a blessing. He stirred against my shoulder, blinking up at me with eyes so full of innocence it almost broke me. "It's just us now," I whispered. "But that's enough. That's more than enough." I drove until the house was nothing but a memory behind me. Each mile put distance between me and the years I had wasted. Each turn of the road felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that Jared had chipped away. By the time I reached my sister Amelia's driveway, the tears finally came, not from sorrow, but from release. She opened the door, saw me standing there with George in my arms, and without a word pulled us both inside. For the first time in months, I let myself collapse into someone's embrace. Safe, unjudged, loved. That night, as George slept in a crib Amelia had set up in her guest room, I sat with my sister at the kitchen table. I told her everything, the doubts, the tests, the laughter, the envelope. She listened without interruption, her hand covering mine when my voice cracked. When I finally finished, she looked at me with fierce protectiveness. "You did the right thing. You chose your son. And yourself." Her words wrapped around me like a balm. For so long I had carried this weight alone. Now finally I had laid it down. Life after leaving Jared did not heal in a straight line. At first every morning felt like waking from a nightmare, only to remember that it was real. I'd rise early at Amelia's feed, George watch the lights spill across her kitchen, and wonder how I had let myself fall so far into the trap of doubt and betrayal. But slowly, with every passing day, I began to feel the weight lift. Amelia became my anchor. She didn't press me to move on too quickly, didn't flood me with advice. She simply sat with me on nights when George wouldn't sleep, on afternoons when I cried over the memories that wouldn't stop replaying. She reminded me again and again that I wasn't broken. That I was a woman who had been wronged, but who still had the power to rise. In the weeks that followed, Jared's family tried to reach out. First with calls filled with shallow apologies, then with messages laced in blame as though I had overreacted. Patricia begged me to think of George's future reputation. Robert threatened to make custody ugly if I didn't return. Daisy predictably sent mocking texts, screenshots of group chats, where she twisted the story to make me look hysterical. But none of it pierced me anymore. I had evidence. I had truth. Most of all, I had chosen myself. When Jared finally showed up at Amelia's doorstep, his eyes hollow and his frame thinner, I stood firm. He begged for forgiveness, promised to change, promised to rebuild. But his words fell like ashes in the wind. I already gave you everything, I told him quietly. My love, my loyalty, my patience. You threw it all away. I don't owe you another chance. His tears did not move me. They only proved what I already knew, that he mourned the loss of control, not the loss of me. I filed for divorce 2 weeks later. The court process was grueling, but each hearing, each document signed was another step toward freedom. When the judge finally granted me sole custody, I felt my lungs fill with air I hadn't breathed in years. George was mine to protect, mine to raise without the shadow of doubt hanging over him. It took months to settle into a new rhythm, but in that time I began to rediscover the pieces of myself I thought I had lost. I returned to painting, something I hadn't touched since college. At first the strokes were heavy, dark, full of grief. But slowly, color seeped back into the canvas, sunsets, oceans, the curve of George's smile. My pain became art. My art became healing. There were still nights when I woke with the echo of that laughter in my ears, the sound of betrayal replaying like a cruel refrain. But instead of breaking me, those memories fueled me. They reminded me of the promise I had made to George and to myself, that we would never again be silenced by cruelty. The final time I saw Jared, he looked like a man undone. His family had fractured under the weight of their own secrets. Their laughter turned bitter. He tried to speak to me in the courthouse hallway, but I only met his eyes once before walking past. There was nothing left to say. Now, when I sit on the floor with George stacking blocks and listening to his giggles fill the room, I feel something I never thought I would again: peace. Not because life is perfect, but because I chose to step out of the shadows of betrayal and into the light of truth. And if you're listening to this wondering if you'll ever rise from your own brokenness, hear me, you will. Sometimes the greatest act of revenge is not destroying the person who hurt you, but refusing to let them define you. My story began with humiliation and laughter at my expense. It ended with silence because the truth spoke louder than I ever could. If this story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of heartbreak, survival, and the strength it takes to rise again. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment you found your own voice again? I'll be reading, and I want to hear from you.